For over 25 years, Professor Judy Baca, who is the founder and artistic director of the Social and Public Art Resource Center, or SPARC, has created public art programs designed to engage participants in civic dialogue, to use art to address pertinent issues in their communities, and to give voice to the silenced histories of marginalized peoples. America is currently undergoing massive demographic shifts, fueled by new waves of immigration, migration, and displacement due to gentrification. The resulting mix of new populations has produced new challenges in terms of integrating diverse peoples from different cultures into the fabric of American society. As a city comprised of people from everywhere in the world, Los Angeles stands as a testament to the changing face of America, with over 129 different languages spoken in the LA Unified School District. According to the LA County Human Relations Commission, the burgeoning growth in populations of racial minorities and changing demographics in Los Angeles have resulted in a documented increase of racial hate crimes in LA County. Over half of these hate crimes were committed by juveniles. In 1976, Judy began the monumental Great Wall of Los Angeles Mural project, which aimed at telling the ethnic history of California, a subject missing from the history books in those days. The first project of its kind, over the course of 9 summers, the project brought together over 400 at-risk youth from diverse socioeconomic and ethnic groups to paint what is now the world's longest mural. The unique teaching methodologies that Judy developed and perfected during the Great Wall Project focus on interpersonal dialogue and relationship building. The projects are designed not only to teach applied art to the students and communities, but also how to use art to interrogate difference and mediate conflict. Using computer and internet technologies, Judy has not only advanced the art form of muralism into the 21st century, leading the way for a whole new generation of artists, she's also taken her collaborative process online in an effort to work with communities that are geographically distant. Judy Baca is a muralist in the great lineage of Diego Rivera and David Cisqueiros, and she has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the National Hispanic Heritage Award for Education for her life's work. It is part of SPARC's manifesto that public art is an unending public process of communication, which is instrumental to creating a strong civil society. Judy's way of community-created public art reweaves relationship and community while engendering real healing. By rendering the past by people in the present to inform the future, and with her integration of beauty, justice, and storytelling, Judy co-creates a living art that can reorient us ethnically and ethically, revitalizing and restoring health to our relationship with place, community, and each other. Judy just told me backstage that last week she just won a Guggenheim Award. So please join me in welcoming an amazing cultural artist, healer, innovator, Judy Baca.
Well, it's wonderful to be here today. It really is an integration transnationally between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, because this is one continent. And so often we are caught in spaces and places that make us believe that history begins when we walk in the door and that we are the center of the universe. I should say, just before I begin kind of excavating a few stories for you, so that you can see a trajectory of work that is about working in a relational way, about putting people into dialogues, about reclaiming our stories, and teaching people to hear them and to tell them to each other in ways that make us compassionate learners and listeners. I should say just a bit about myself. I was born in Los Angeles. I am unique in that. I'm becoming a rare bird, an angelita, born in the city of Los Angeles in South Central, in a time in which Watts was a Black and Hispanic community. At 85th and Central, I grew up with my grandmother and my mother, who worked in the tire factory. And from there, in our trajectory toward upward mobility, we moved to a place called Pacoima, a place you would not know except for the fact that the famous artist Luis Valdez made a film about it called La Bamba. I went to school with Richie Valens. These are my claims to fame. It's because of that experience that when I stepped out of art school, I began to examine what art was for. I graduated, and my grandmother, who was very much like a small Apache, never speaking English, moving through the world with a view that was quite profoundly different than all those around her, told me, looking at my artwork, a minimalist painter that I had become after the 70s, she said, "What is it for?" Everything had a place in Francisca's world. The little plants that grew by the water fountain, the verdugas turned into greens that went into the frijoles. All of the plantings had special remedies. In Francisca's world, everything had a purpose. And so today when I begin, I want to tell you that all of this is about answering her question. It's about what the purpose of art is and what it can do in the function of a society. And it's really about speaking to people I knew and know in the communities of Los Angeles that are marginalized and perhaps are not the places where you would think art should be. It isn't the poor and working communities, the places which beauty is considered to be superfluous, that it is so critically important. So with that, I'm going to begin excavating the story, remembering that the purpose of a monument is to bring the past into the present to change the future. So we'll begin with the slides. This is a little model developed by myself and the Social and Public Art Resource Center to change artists' ideas about what point in which they enter. Public art is not about mediating a shopping center that destroys a community. It is actually about the fact that it begins with a site that has an inherent nature. The topography of the site might be a place, for example, in which a parking lot is being placed over the site of a historic farm field in the Central Valley of California. And also what is in the place is the spirit of that place, meaning all the animals, creatures, and life that have passed through that site are embedded somehow there. And above that is the current enactments. Is this the place where development is planned? And above that is what does the artist see on the site? And finally, the transformations that will be created by the application of metaphor, the applications of dialogue that will manifest themselves in a physical artwork that will be placed in the particular place. The interesting thing about this is that almost all cultures believe that memory resides in place. We don't know how, but we know that when we go to the fields of Gettysburg, or we go to where a particular event has occurred, that all of that history is somehow there and that we can feel it and we can know it. So much of this work is about the memory of the land. And if we could, for example, excavate that memory, what would we hear? What would we see in those places? This is perhaps the site on which the city of Los Angeles was founded. The river looked something like this. It ran heavy in the winters. It was very light in the summers. And it was on these banks that the first Tangva people placed their encampments, and later, as the Spanish came, they built the first missions. I'm going to move rapidly through history because it was very shortly thereafter when the first mission was founded on the Rio de Temblores that the river itself and the land shook the first mission down. And that site remained an important beginning. It's somewhere around Alvera Street was the beginning of our city. And yet the city fathers almost instantly realized that the river overflowing its banks every year needed to be tamed, that it was a bad river somehow. It destroyed property. And as the developers determined that property was going to be the commodity of Los Angeles, they had to tame this river. They had to control it. And so they systematically began to concrete the river. This took them through the 1920s to the 1970s. Most of us know this history. We have seen the culverts. We have seen the spaces all over Los Angeles in which these rivers, which were the arteries of the land, became hardened and, in a sense, became diseased. developing a disease in general around the city of LA. And it's really, I think, this as the beginning of our city that made it possible for entire populations of people to be disappeared within the history and recollections of our place, the city of Los Angeles. It was in 1974 that I faced the river for the first time with the Army Corps of Engineers, who had completed their work, 30 years of building concrete rivers, culverts that created tremendous environmental problems, necessitating spreading grounds, mosquito abatement, removing the water from the aquifer, and all of the other concurrent problems of disappearing a river. They had developed a plan called the Aesthetic Planning Division. The Aesthetic Planning Division was to kind of deal with what they had made. Could it become beautiful again? What could we do with a river that had dirt belts on either side and children falling into it and all the kind of concurrent problems of rivers hardened? It was in that year, in 1974, that I proposed that we tattoo this river, that we begin a process of working to bring different groups of young people from all over the city to one site. This was an important thing because in the city of Los Angeles, our neighborhoods were divided by geography and by great distances and also by huge cultural differences. The flood control channel provided a site in which it was possible to bring young people from all over the city to one place and begin to work on a narrative that would become our story, the story of all of us together, in 13.5 feet below the ground level. And it actually came from an experience I had in East Los Angeles, and I'll tell you this story briefly. I was painting on the streets with gang members, organizing peace treaties between different neighborhoods, when I met a young man who was an incredibly powerful leader. His leadership was directed toward organizing young kids in his own benefit, which was toward the making of a gang. He was quickly interested in the idea that the walls could become neighborhood newspapers, that they could be transformed into something beautiful, and that people could be united. But his history caught up with him when we were painting in a place called Hollenbeck Park in Boyle Heights, a mural called Mi Abuelita, my grandmother. And it was a grandmother whose arms were outstretched in a band shell. It was the first mural I produced with these kids. And at that mural, Fernando left after working all day, and he had excelled as a leader. His leadership was pointed in the right direction. And he went to his old neighborhood and was attacked by an opposing gang and was stabbed 13 times. He nearly died, but he made it through this incredible experience and came back to the completion of the mural. And as we stood together, all of us, the team, welcoming Fernando back, kid said to him, how are you doing? I mean, how are you feeling? And he said, my body's okay. He said, but every time I take off my shirt, my body is a map of violence. And it was this that I thought of when I saw this site, that this was a scar that needed to be tattooed. And as we developed images for tattoos on Fernando's body to transform those scars, we thought of the river in the same way. So it was with 80 young people from the juvenile justice system that we began the tattooing of the scar where the river once ran. This is what it looked like with dirt belts on either side, a division in a community. This is what it looked like as we began planting it and turning it into a site in which people could walk along the river site and see the imagery in a long narrative. Now, the task was more difficult than one would imagine. Could we work together? Could we bring young people from different neighborhoods who had long histories of division to talk about what we had in common, to share each other's stories, and begin respectfully to understand each other's history? This was a process that I was learning at the same time the kids were learning. This is actually a section of the 1940s, produced over a 9-week period with 50 young people and about 5 artists working in teams and working with historians and also people who lived through the experiences that we're depicting in this imagery. You'll see the last image is the post-war baby boom. The baby boomers are coming onto the earth, shaking their boom box and making loud noises as they come into the 1940s. This is all about the imaging of content. Making the young people part of the story is really critical. Why is history important? Why do you need to know what happened before you if you're going to be controllers of your own future? And why were you disappeared? Why were there no Latinos in the history books? Why did we not see what Native American people had done? Why did we not see the achievements of African Americans all over history, American history? And it was that excavation that brought us to the making of these imagery. Here you can see us in our morning meeting talking about the content as the young people are developing the content from the real imagery. This is a scene probably little known. It is the moment of the deportation of over 500,000 people from the state of California in the 1930s. Whether you were Mexican-born or Mexican-American really didn't matter. The buses came, you were placed on the trains, and you were sent out of the country because illegal aliens were considered to be a blight to our landscape in a period of economic downturn. So as the economics went down, people were deported, and as the economic need was created, immigrants were brought in. A cycle, incidentally, which we are in the middle of again. This is the imagery of the deportation. The segment on the newspaper is taken exactly from the newspaper. The creation of an anti-immigrant feeling in the media as part of the aspect of the deportation sequences. This is how it was translated by 14 through 18-year-old hands, all trained to work in structured painting application, meaning the mystery of how one paints was to be taught at that site so that young people could participate in the making of a giant monument that would be important for people to see, but not so inaccessible that they couldn't do it themselves. Here we are painting on the Dustbowl refugees who are arriving at the same time that the deportations are occurring in the 1930s. The history of the Japanese internment, for example, is another aspect. Important were that these kids who all came from different ethnic groups did not paint simply their own history. They began to own the history of each ethnic group, a mixed group, understanding that all of these stories were our stories. And here you can see the woman weeping, and it came from a marvelous moment in which a poet came and said, "I was in the camp. My name is Amy Ishii. I wrote a book called Camp Notes. Let me read from it." And she talked to the kids about what it was like to wait in line with thousands of people to brush your teeth and to be moved from the lush gardens of East LA into Manzanar. And so this was the imagery that we created to depict that moment. These are the 1930 segments, a 350-foot segment done in 9 weeks with kids from the juvenile justice system. And I might add that many of these kids were considered to be incorrigible by the people who referred them to me. They were happy to give me the kids. They said, "Here, you take them." But it was much harder to develop the resources. So the process of producing the half-a-mile-long mural took me 12 years. This is the Rosie the Riveter sequence in the 1950s. Rosie's coming back from the war. She's being sucked into the TV set by a woman with a vacuum cleaner. Go home, Rosie, become Marilyn Monroe. Stop looking like Katharine Hepburn. And the perfect American family is depicted here in the imagery of 2.5 children and Howdy Doody making up the half-child. This is the little ticky-tacky houses in the background of suburbia developing. Incidentally, we are painting in suburbia. This is the San Fernando Valley. It is the center of white flight in the 1950s. So we are not preaching to the converted. We are having to win over our neighbors at the same time that we are winning over each other. This is the segment on McCarthy, and McCarthyism is depicted as the House on Un-American Activities is a trash can made up of people who are pointing at each other and accusing each other of being communist. Sputnik is in the sky lurking, and people are sliding off a blacklist into the trash can. The typewriter is pink. It's a commie typewriter. And beyond that is the list that comes off this blacklist becomes the freeway system that divides our communities. And the freeway system here divided is showing a part of East Los Angeles. This is dedicated to one of my students at Irvine, a very middle-class kid who said to me, "You know, Professor Baca, what I really don't understand is why do Hispanics always live near freeways? Do they like cars?" So to my young student, this is to talk about how communities have not always had the capacity to advocate for good environments, and that there are environmental racism issues that we must address. So here you see a family divided by a freeway, Dodger Stadium as close encounters of the third kind spaceship appearing in the old history of Sonora Town. Mrs. Archega, who is a very wonderful character, is being carried off by a cop, and her mother is throwing rocks at Dodger Stadium. And the wonderful moments of history in which from the back of the bus come the forebearers of civil rights. Paul Robeson, a figure whose face should be familiar to everyone, but because he was blacklisted, is not well known. Along with Big Mama Thornton on the left, who's got the mic, and she is the woman who made the song, "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," famous, before Elvis actually took it up. And on the right, of course, Rosa Parks, Gwendolyn Brooks, who won the Pulitzer Prize in the 1950s, Ralph Bunche, who's working in the UN, and behind him, Martin Luther King, all coming from the back of the bus. You'll note an ominous set of figures behind Rosa Parks. Those ominous figures are the police in the closet as they're beginning the vice entrapments, and the first gay rights activities are occurring in the 1950s with the Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society. But the cops are growing kind of funny little noses as they're poking them in the closet. This is the Great Wall today. It is now 27 years old. It is an extension on the web pages. My students and young people are analyzing right now the 1960s, examining the war in Iraq, making the comparisons to the war in Vietnam. These are young people born in the 70s. Their life doesn't span that whole period of time, so they are going back to speak to people. So part of what we need is to hear from activists like you, to hear about these stories, for these kids to be able to depict them in the new segments of the Great Wall. I want to talk just about this excavation and what it meant to some of these people, because as we do the restoration and extend this wall now, we're looking back at the young people who participated. This is a young woman named Ernestine. Here she's 14 years old. She's given to me by the juvenile justice system, who have her in an incarceration home a few blocks from the Mural. And they say that she is incorrigible. This is her 2 years later on the Great Wall with her son, who's become a mascot, and she's becoming a crew leader. Her brother has been killed in black and brown warfare in the city. She has been using drugs, very terrible drugs like PCP, and she is on her way to recovery. Here she is 5 years later on the team, becoming a supervisor. Here she is 25 years later with her son. Ernie's a caregiver. She cares for older Jewish citizens. And she does that because she learned to give love. And because, in fact, even though she was the 16th child in her family, she was able to, through the Great Wall process, finish school, begin to be a person who could love other people, and understood the purpose and meaning of service. I'm very proud of this girl. At the Great Wall, the kids said, we should take what we learned around the world. Let's move it to other countries that are embattled with each other. And so, as a result of suggestions from 16-year-olds, we began a process of the creation of a piece called the World Wall. And it basically took one segment of the Great Wall and moved it from site to site. And in each country to which it traveled, we asked artists to do their job again. Not to be worried about marketing paintings, not to be worried about the kinds of things that historically we have been engaged in, sort of commercialization. But what would happen if actually we began to do our work in such a way that we ask each other to envision a different future? Very quickly, I'm going to go through this imagery and show you a piece that was exhibited in Gorky Park, in which the Russians added their piece at the fall of the Communist Party. Here's the babushka the morning of the opening, as she's preparing the site. This is an arena for dialogue. And this is the moment of the fall of the churches opening again, and people making the Russian sign of the cross and Russian Orthodox. And what we're looking at here is Alexei Begov's Cossack artist's contribution to the traveling installation mural. It does not set up in places that are high art and museums and galleries, but goes to the places where people live and work. And so here you see the Finnish artists and their contribution developing a piece that was added. Here at the conversion of Fort Ord in Monterey, we added the Israeli-Palestinian collaboration. And this work was done by very gracious artists working in their communities with children, depicting peace. And what we discovered is that people did not really have a clear idea of what peace is. Only the absence of war, but the presence of what? What does peace look like? The Hopis helped us. They told us that it was an active concept, one that we had to continually try to achieve, a balance that was something that we had to work at each day. So this is the Palestinian artist who is mimicking the movement of his father, who is a domestic worker, and he's showing an image behind him that is his addition to the Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian collaboration. I'm very proud to say that the work is continuing to move. It has additions from Mexico. Here it is back in East Los Angeles, in the neighborhoods where peace is something still to be attained. And there, we asked the young people, once again, to talk about peace in their communities and what that meant, looking at all of this as an international collaboration toward a world at peace. Here, during the riots in Los Angeles, people in Santa Barbara gathered to talk about peace in neighborhoods and between people, and it became a kind of midnight vigil. This is an image of the figure of a birthing child in the balance image, the final center image of the work, which is about the world in balance, people and the planet. And with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation and end with the figures holding the lights, each of them with the world in their eyes, dreaming about a different future. You see people holding each the light, which is in fact the case. All of us are part of the solution, and certainly the dreaming and imagination of artists are critical to our movements, and we need to be working together again. So thank you very much for hearing me tonight.